Okay, we have the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Tuesday, the 31st of May, 2022, and we are beginning with the question, who was not here on Friday? We're all here on Fridays. You all took the quiz, and you do not need to take it again. What?
Oh, I said I can't even take it back.
Yes, I know. 3 whole days off. And it's a different world. And just think, the next vacation you have from school is vacation.
That's still 2 weeks.
For the summer. Oh, stop.
Too much
Damn.
time.
Okay. We begin the late Middle Ages with a story from me about climate change. Climate change? But Mr. Genorio, you say, you don't believe in man-made climate change. No, I don't. I believe that there are climate shifts that always happen, that we're a part of a very big system, but it just bugs me that the same answer to global climate change, which is a global regulatory government that controls all of our lives and every aspect of them, is the exact same solution that they pitched for the problem of poverty 100 years ago, they being communists. I just don't buy it. I do not think that in an emergency, you go, oh, government, please save me with your laws and your rules about how I live my life. No, I don't buy it. So, I also don't buy it because when I was a little younger than you, the very same people who are old now, who are pitching today man-made climate change, in the 90s pitched global warming, and in the 70s pitched a new ice age. Same exact people. Just like real communism has never been tried, and therefore, all the 100 million plus murdered by communists in peacetime, they don't really count, because real communism hasn't been tried. The climate scientists who've been preaching gloom and doom and please regulate us, have, for the period of the last half century when I've been alive, argued for diametrically opposed conclusions. And every single one of their predictions has turned out to be, what's the word? Rhymes with balls. False. That's it. False. Yes. Good. But you're a history teacher. What do you know about science? I don't know much about science. I know a lot about human nature now, though. And it's human nature that drives these things. However, just because I don't believe in the science of man-made climate change, see how persuasive I am in convincing you that it doesn't exist? I'm not even trying to persuade you. I assume that most of you have been brainwashed to such an extent that there's no way you would even seriously question the notion of man-made climate change. And again, you're individuals. I hope that you live in reason and insist on making up your own mind about things rather than just going along with the stampede. Back at school. I should probably restrain myself. But what's the fun in that?
Exactly.
Okay.
My mom feeds me.
In reality, the climate does change. Dan, I didn't hear that, and that's probably a good thing. I will, however, reel it back and listen to it on tape. So if a giant blade comes down towards your neck, you'll know why.
Okay.
Good. Me, Mr. Guillotine. I'd never use a guillotine as a revolutionary weapon.
Oh,
I am not a revolutionary.
Get a big old watermelon?
That's right. Giant watermelon will do the job. Just gone. Okay. The global climate does change. Twice in the early history of the Earth, the entire atmosphere was frozen solid. We were like Europa, the moon of Jupiter. We had a completely frozen atmosphere. Not once, but twice. And one of those times was after life had formed. So life forms in the ocean, little tiny singular cell life, like viruses, only more complicated than that. And then everything freezes, and they survive. Life's pretty adaptable. Let's see. But that's, also during the Devonian period, the atmosphere of the Earth contained so much ambient oxygen that when there was a thunderstorm, it was like an artillery barrage, because the thunder literally ignited oxygen in the air. This was also the time we have insects, with dragonflies with wingspans wider than my arms. Giant dragonflies and giant spiders the size of dogs. We saw some movies about that earlier in the year. Fun stuff. Little spider chasing a lizard. And then the spider gets zammed by lightning and turns into a crispy critter. Yeah, that happened. But Mr. Genorio, you say, you history, not science teacher, why are you talking about ancient history, history before man? Okay, let's talk about the history of humans. And in fact, we're going to even telescope it to the history of humans during recorded history, which is really not a very long time, just a few thousand years. In 406 AD, the Goths crossed the frozen Rhine River to attack Roman Gaul. Frozen Rhine River. The global climate was cooler then than it is now because the Rhine River doesn't freeze solid, certainly not enough for an entire Volkswanderung to cross a river. 1,000 years ago, just, 600 years after the frozen Rhine River, it was warm enough for wine grapes to grow on the island of Newfoundland. Thus, the name Vinland for the colony of Vikings in North America, on the island of Newfoundland. Trees barely grow in Newfoundland, let alone wine grapes today. Global climate was warmer 1,000 years ago. Hell, the same thing happened in Scotland. They grew wine in Scotland. Aye, Scottish wine! Can you just imagine? You'd have to appreciate just how not wine drinking the Scots are what's their national dish? Haggis? It's basically a giant sheep stomach sausage filled with oatmeal. That's why they have scotch, to get the haggis down. In any event, how dare you insult Scotland? So 1,000 years ago, the world was warmer than it is now. And what that means is the climate does whatever it wants. And we, being adaptable creatures, will either adapt or perish. What if global sea levels rise? We'll move our cities. But you can't move a city. No, we'll build new ones. We'll call it New York. And it'll be inland. Yes.
Because all the waters are going to rush in overnight.
Suddenly, yes. Just like in the movie 2012, which happened 10 years ago. But wait, it didn't. Because the Mayans said the world would be over in 2012. And the computer genius that said the world would be over in Y2K. And in 1982, I think it was, there was a syzygy, which means all the planets are on the same side of the sun, which will cause a wobble and destroy the world. And need I go on? Because the world is always coming to an end, and yet, sooner or later it will. I'd rather not be around for it. It'll be down, depressing, but, it's just a world. Hopefully by then we'll be in space. So if we lose one world, it won't be the end of our world. But we'll see. In any event, in the late 1100s, something happens. What? Well, it could be that the warm water conveyor current that had kept things warm caused a bunch of icebergs to break off of the Arctic ice shelf and the Antarctic ice shelf and confusticate the warm water current with all the ice, and suddenly the warm water currents are messed up and we end up with global cooling, suddenly, precipitously. That's possible. Or there were a series of volcanoes, Krakatoa-style volcanoes, the kind of volcanoes that have the force of atomic weapons. And what does a volcano do? It spews debris into the upper atmosphere, occluding sunlight. What does occluding mean? It means blocking, but it sounds so much cooler. Occluding. Remember that word. Try using it today. It'll impress someone, yeah.
Concealing sounds cooler than that.
I don't know. Concealing's a little common. You could say eclipsing. Yeah. In any event, the sunlight, it gets blocked a bit. And it happens whenever there's a volcanic eruption. Global climate always cools by a slight amount. Global climate cools, let's see if I remember correctly. You at home, you can check your science people. I think about 13 degrees today. It's anywhere between 4 and 13 degrees. It's Why not between 1 and 15 degrees? It cools a bunch of degrees. Now, at a global level, when you have a cooling like that, it's going to have effects. On whom? Well, let's talk about the civilized people first. See, the civilized people, remember that pyramid, that social pyramid where most people are peasants, serfs, and slaves? What do they do again? What's their job? Farming. They produce food. Yeah. And what happens when you have basically subsistence farming and the global temperature cools? There ain't enough to subsist upon. So suddenly you have lower crop yields and increasing starvation. Yeah, that happens. In fact, throughout this period, from the late 1100s through the 1300s, you have a real climate instability. It's funny as heck. And that climate instability is a death sentence to a whole lot of people. Now, picture the area in Asia, north of China. It's a grassland. It's called Mongolia. Picture it like a giant paper wasp nest under your roof. You're noticing it because the weather's getting warmer. And picture the climate taking a stick and playing Jedi Knight with it.
Oh.
Beep, beep, beep.
You just gotta get a claw and throw it at
What will the paper wasps tend to do?
They're
So,
so
we understand, humans. We understand you don't want our colonies on your homes. We'll let it go. Or they surge at you in a giant swarm and try to sting you to death. Yes, that's it. Because nature hates us. We live despite nature, not because of nature. Oh, but nature's so nice. Yes, we're apex predators. If we weren't apex predators, we'd appreciate that nature is scary. Very scary. Yes.
If I ever see like a giant wasp nest, I'm just gonna burn the house down. Simple solution.
Okay, good. As long as you choose something reasonable and proportionate,
Yeah.
I have no concerns. None at all.
The insurance company will love that.
They will.
Yes, they will.
They're gonna ask.
Especially when you ask for the full value of the house. As you walk in looking like Wile E. Coyote's super genius after he tried one of his experiments on the Roadrunner.
Daniel, hairspray and a lighter, you're fine.
No, I got a flamethrower. Don't worry.
Oh, okay.
If you've ever heard of Sherlock Holmes, it was written by Arthur Conan Doyle. And Arthur Conan Doyle didn't like Sherlock Holmes. He wrote it for money because he likes what you can buy with money. Strange fellow, that. Most of us appreciate, money can't buy you happiness. Money can just buy you a lot of stuff that will bring you happiness. In any event, Conan Doyle's favorite book that he wrote was called Sir Nigel, and its sequel, The White Company, which is a book about a young knight during the 100 Years' War between England and France. Spoiler alert, there's going to be a 100 Years' War between England and France, and there are going to be knights involved. Anyway, this is how he begins Sir Nigel, and it deals with the question of climate instability that we were just talking about. Just so happens I have a copy right here, but I don't have it queued up. Chapter 1. Page 2. There's no page number. Page 1. And everything. Okay. In the month of July of the year 1348, between the feasts of Saint Benedict and of Saint Swithin, a strange thing came upon England. For out of the east there drifted a monstrous cloud, purple and piled heavy with evil, climbing slowly up the hushed heaven. You role-playing the cloud?
I don't like those red chairs.
They don't like you.
I don't either.
It's mutual. Climbed slowly up the hushed heavens. In the shadow of that strange cloud, the leaves drooped in the trees, the birds ceased their calling, and the cattle and the sheep gathered cowering under the hedges. A gloom fell upon all the land, and men stood with their eyes upon the strange cloud, and a heaviness upon their hearts. They crept into the churches, where the trembling people were blessed and shriven by the trembling priests. Outside no bird flew, and there came no rustling from the woods, nor any of the homely sounds of nature. All was still. Nothing moved, save only the great cloud which rolled up and onward, with fold on fold from the black horizon. To the west was the light summer sky, to the east this brooding cloud bank, creeping ever slowly across, until the last thin blue gleam faded away, and the whole vast sweep of the heavens was one great leaden arch. Then the rains began to fall. All day it rained, and all the night, and all the week, and all the month, until folk had forgotten the blue heavens and the gleam of sunshine. It was not heavy, but it was steady and cold and unceasing, so that the people were weary of its hissing and its splashing, with the slow drip from the eaves. Always the same thick evil cloud flowed from the east to the west, with the rain beneath it. None could see for more than a bow shot from their dwellings for the drifting veil of the rainstorms. Every morning the folk looked up for a break, but their eyes rested always upon the same endless cloud, until at last they ceased to look up, and their hearts despaired of ever seeing the change. It was raining at Lammas tide, and raining at the Feast of the Assumption, and still raining at Michaelmas. The crops and the hay, sodden and black, had rotted in the fields, for they were not worth the garnering. The sheep had died, and the calves also. So there was little to kill when Martinmas came, and it was time to salt the meat for the winter. They feared a famine, but it was worse than famine, which was in store for them. For the rain had ceased at last, and the sickly autumn sun shone upon a land which was soaked and sodden with water. Wet and rotten leaves reeked and festered under the foul haze which rose from the woods. The fields were spotted with monstrous fungi, of a size and color never matched before, scarlet and mauve and liver and black. It was as though the sick earth had burst into foul pustules. Mildew and lichen mottled the walls, and with that filthy crop death sprang also from the water-soaked earth. Men died, and women, and children, the baron of the castle, the franklin on the farm, the monk in the abbey, and the villein in his wattle-endowed cottage. All breathed the same polluted reek, and all died the same death of corruption. Of those who were stricken, none recovered, and the illness was ever the same, gross boils, raving, and the black blotches which gave its name to the disease. All through the winter the dead rotted by the wayside, for want of someone to bury them. In many a village no single man was left alive. Then at last the spring came with sunshine, and health, and lightness, and laughter, the greenest, sweetest, tenderest spring that England had ever known. But only half of England could know it. The other half had passed away with the great purple cloud. This speaks of the climate instability, of a year without a summer, and of the coming of the Black Death, which is something else that characterizes the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages. A year without a summer, in a society that starves twice a year just before harvest. A year without a summer, in a society that grows barely enough food to feed maybe 10 or 20% of the people who don't grow food. A year without a summer. Even if the Black Death didn't come, there would still be famine, and in the weakened state, disease. Why is this happening? Why are we being punished? Is God being angry at us for our sins? There are always sins that we commit. What are we doing wrong? What should we be doing that we're not? Because it must be our fault. We're suffering. It couldn't just be an accident. Fate isn't that cruel. There must be a lesson here. The desperation to find a lesson makes things worse. Added to famine and plague comes war. War in all of its forms. Civil war, religious war, war in the streets between criminals and everyone who's their victim. People need an answer. People will find a scapegoat. People will choose to believe what they believe. And when there isn't enough food, you replace food with fanaticism. How bad does it get? Hungry people in a village strip the village bare, start boiling their shoe leather to try to eat it even though it's poisoned. They eat grass. Then they go up into the woods, eat bark off the trees, strip the bark from the trees and boil it, drink the soup. All the little plants and animals are taken or driven away. Nature, which depends on all of those little plants and animals, becomes unstable. The people are weak. They've eaten everything they can. They're dying slowly of hunger. In the woods and hills, the wolves are the apex predators. Bears in Northern Europe, the wolves in general. I used to work with a woman who loved wolves. She had wolves all over her office. She was the finance director for a social service agency I worked for. A wonderful lady. Taught me to like Thai food, which is good. And she famously used to say that there's never been a registered attack by a wolf on a human being in North America. Well, that may be true in North America. I'm not sure I believe it, but it's certainly not true for Europe. Because here's what happened. Wolves, whose normal diet was gone because the human beings stripped the woods clear of them, began to go after the slow, two-legged creatures that did all this. And humans, well, humans are scary to wolves because we'll kill them if they mess with us. But if we're weak, if we're lying in our huts and we hear the wolves come into the village, brazen as all them, barking and growling, at first we'll make noise. We might even get up and throw rocks at them, throw sticks at them, hit them with pitchforks and swords. Peasants didn't have swords. But eventually, we get weaker, and the wolves get more desperate. And we stop getting up and throwing things at them. We stop getting up, we just make noise. And eventually we see Uncle Ed get dragged by the heels out of the cup. There's not much we can do, except hope that Uncle Ed is enough for them for a while, because they'll come for us next. Cannibalism exists. This is where werewolf legends come from. This sort of desperation. When the global climate cools, it begins what is known as the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age is a period from around just before 1200 to around just before 1850. It is entirely possible that the Little Ice Age was nosing us into a real ice age, but that our ability to burn coal and other carbon changed that. Certainly, since the early 1800s, the global climate has warmed. Maybe as a result of our burning carbon. In any event, the Little Ice Age is going to loom across this entire period of history, making life harsher, making crops more difficult to grow, making population more easy to cull. The late Middle Ages is much harsher, much darker, much more grim than the High Middle Ages. All of that progress that was made during the High Middle Ages is going to be put to the test. Now we come to Mongolia. Mongolia is a difficult place to live anyway. It's a grassland, some hills. The people who live there are people of the horse. Their horses are actually steppe ponies, little shaggy things. Compared to an Arabian horse, a steppe pony looks like a Volkswagen Beetle compared to a Corvette. Corvettes used to be really cool sports cars. Yes, they're beautiful. Arabian is the Corvette. So how can little steppe ponies, little Volkswagen Beetles, be a problem? Well, the people who live in that area live with some of the harshest winters in the world. You think central Canada, northern Canada is bad? Siberia is worse. And these people are just south of Siberia. In the summer, it's desert hot. In the winter, it's ridiculously cold. Several tens of degrees below zero on average. And these people live with horses and grass. They can't grow many crops. They grow what they can, but mostly they live off of their animals. They have sheep and goats, and they live off of them. What do they drink for booze? They drink fermented mare's milk. Yep, they get horse milk, let it spoil. When it's properly spoiled, they drink it. It's a man's drink.
No. No.
They make their tents, which are called yurts, out of the felt from the fur of their animals. And they learn to ride before they can walk. And it's these people who are just living their lives in a very precarious area that get swapped like the paper wasp nest by the little ice age. The area cools, and suddenly life, which was already harsh, becomes super harsh. This is the moment waiting for a man. And the man that comes is Temujin, known to history as the Emperor of Mankind, or Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan is what means the Emperor of Mankind. He is the snowflake that causes the avalanche. Picture a Swiss mountain, pointy, redolent with snow, lots of snow. The snow is perfectly balanced, precariously balanced. Everything's perfect. And that boop, that snowflake, is enough to destabilize everything and cause all the snow to slide down the mountain and crush the village that was stupidly built right below an avalanche zone. The Swiss got better at that. So, that's what we're dealing with. Climate change. Now, Temujin has a tough childhood. His father ends up being killed. And he has to live as an outcast because his father's enemies aren't stupid. They realize if Temujin grows up, he's going to take revenge on them. So they try to kill him too. So he has to live out under the open sky alone without a tribe. That's like trying to survive in a modern prison without being a member of a gang. It's very, very, very difficult. There's Temujin, and then there's Tengri, the sky god of the Mongols. But Temujin prospers and eventually becomes strong, and his people respect strength more than anything else. And he becomes, by force of will and force of power, willpower, get it? He becomes the chief of the minor tribe, the Mongols. The real people who were powerful in those days were the Tartars. You know, what the sauce is named after. But I once had a student talk about the taters. Because sometimes the Tartars are written to Tatars. and he did a presentation on the taters,
Oh, no.
and I kept trying to correct him,
I dare not.
but he was so nervous he kept saying taters over and over and over again.
I like taters.
So the taters conquer the world. Gotta watch them. Can't trust root vegetables; they're dangerous. So I should have taught it better. Let's learn a little bit about the Mongols. First of all, we're going to learn from a song, because songs are the way a lot of people in pre-civilized times learn stuff. This is a Mongolian rock band called what? Oh, yes. God knows. I wouldn't want to claim credit for what a bunch of Mongols did, because seriously, they're tough guys. They'd kill me. So, let's talk about the way the Mongols operate. First of all, Temujin manages to lead an alliance under his command of all of the various tribes north of China. They all come under his rule. Now, he does so through a combination of war and diplomacy and war. I know I said war twice, but he's Genghis Khan. That's what he does. He does war. And really, really well. Now, he sent out representatives to a Central Asian empire that we don't even remember anymore, called the Empire of the Khwarazm Shah. It's to the west of Mongolia, basically super Kazakhstan today. And the Mongol representatives were killed by the Khwarazm Shah in his court. He killed them, despite the fact that they were ambassadors on an embassy. It's not something that you do. So Genghis Khan launched his first foreign conquest by destroying the empire of the Khwarazm Shah. It has never reformed. Now, normally, how do the Mongols move across the steppe? Well, that's a good color for them. I think orange.
I didn't think.
Yes, but you'd be wrong.
Orange.
Just so we're clear. So here you are. Oh, let's make you purple.
Pink. Please.
Fine.
Oh,
Fine. Pink. You're pink. It's almost June. Okay. Boop. There you are.
I want.
Just a person, man, minding his own business in the plains. And then in front of you, you see
You know what? I'll take it.
a bunch of Mongols.
They're from Khwarazm.
And the thing to do, of course, is to run. Because Mongols.
I think
The problem is, the Mongols operate in a giant crescent moon formation.
Just one person.
Well, we're assuming that each dot represents a bunch of people. In any event, little Pinky here goes running this way
Ooh.
without even realizing that the Mongols are already past him, and every so often the crescent moon pinches closed. Beep. Uh-oh. Not good to be him.
That is dead.
Now, the Mongols do exist in vast numbers. That's true. That's part of their power. They're all on horseback. That's true. That's part of their power, which gives them mobility. But that's not all. Just like the Arabs were desert tough during the height of their jihad to conquer the Persian Empire and the eastern two-thirds of the Byzantine Empire and the Roman world, because having learned to survive on the Arabian desert, they were just tougher than anyone they met. At this point in time, those are the Mongols. Their environment is cool, not hot, but except in the summer. But by surviving in this petri dish of misery that is Mongolia, are just physically tougher and mentally tougher and emotionally tougher than anyone they're liable to meet. You know what makes a really good boxer? My stepfather was a boxer when he was younger. They don't mind pain that much. And he described it as they just don't they don't feel pain the same way as a normal person does. They have thick skin. They have lower pain receptors. That may be true. But what it boils down to is every time you hit someone, you hurt your hands. You may make fists. They may be in gloves even. You're still going to hurt your hands. Every time someone hits you, it hurts. One of the first steps in learning how to box is not minding the pain, expecting it. Professional wrestlers. Couldn't believe this the first time I heard it. There was a movie about a guy from the 80s and 90s who was big in professional wrestling called Bret the Hitman Hart. And he came from a wrestling family. His father was a wrestler, and he ran a wrestling school. And basically what the father did is anyone who wanted to join his wrestling school was brought into the basement or out to the shed, whatever the weather was, and the father put him in pain holds. I mean, one pain hold after another pain hold after another pain hold. And if you couldn't take it, you were out. If you could handle the pain, then he'd teach you other stuff. But professional wrestling. When I was a kid, we used to make fun of it. Bam! See, I hurt you. Bam! See, I get the noise of the punch.
We actually did that.
Yeah, it's actually really much more difficult than it looks, and it's going to cause you pain. When somebody whams another guy in the head with a steel chair, that's not a fake chair. It's made of steel. The skull is made of flesh and bone and brain. And you're hitting him in the head. Yeah.
Just with one of my friends, he does wrestling. It's not professional or anything, but he's actually like wrestling.
So real wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling,
like actual wrestling.
Yeah.
And he just routinely just dislocates his shoulder.
Oh,
Awesome.
Does he know how to put it back? Does he bang it?
He's had me help him just pull on his shoulder and he just slides it back into his socket.
Yeah.
Has he ever been hit in the head with a chair?
No.
Because
They don't do that in Greco-Roman wrestling.
Matches or anything where you have to climb the ladder matches.
The ladder matches, and then there are cage matches. That's all professional wrestling. Professional wrestling is fake. You know why?
No, it's not.
Because a couple of 40-year-old guys beating on each other with steel chairs who don't practice kill each other. That's why. Of course it's fake. Of course it's fake. It's male soap operas. You remember last week, Death Mask, when you threw a car on me? Well, I'm going to make you rue the day you were born. I mean, that's male soap opera stuff. It is. But the prerequisite of all of it is the ability to withstand pain and still function. Why do you think basic training in the military is the way it is? Because if you can't handle Sergeant Bilko or Sergeant Slaughter or whatever, the sergeant yelling at you in the face and them shark attacking you, if you can't handle men yelling at you, you're not going to be able to handle combat very well. Of course, a few years ago, in the name of humanizing our training methods, they stopped allowing sergeants to shark attack people. A shark attack is where a bunch of sergeants are suddenly on you, pointing out every flaw in you. You're being yelled at by 4 or 5 different guys who are professional yellers simultaneously. And you're being expected to respond properly. And if you don't, See, it's training for battle. But it's not humane, so we don't do it anymore. Consequently, our men are less prepared for battle.
What losers.
I would call the politicians who get involved in things they don't understand losers, but that's just me. You don't understand it. No, but I try to have respect for it. Okay. So the Mongols are physically tougher than anyone they're likely to meet. Why do they destroy the empire of the Khwarazm Shah? I'll tell you. I was gonna. You knew that. They destroy the empire of the Khwarazm Shah because they don't like cities. Cities make men into sissies and women into God knows what. So when the Mongols approach a new city, like a city in the empire of the Khwarazm Shah, a couple of them will show up. And if the gates are opened and the city immediately surrenders, the city might survive. Of course, most cities don't do that. They close their walls and say, we have walls, you don't. So what the Mongols will do is capture 1 or 2 dozen people from the city, usually from outside. And they'll stick stakes in the ground with a good view of the city. And they'll tie them there, feed them, make sure they have what they need to live. Because the point is not to kill these people, for them to bear witness. And then the Mongols will surge over the walls of the city, which they're good at. Most people, when they take over a city, appreciate that it's a source of wealth and power. It's about conquering cities and making them yours and turning their tax money into your tax money, and their craftsmen into your craftsmen, and their women into your playthings, and their men into your slaves. It's what cities are for. They're there to be sacked. They're full of booty, and they are to be ruled, but not according to the Mongols. No, what the Mongols will do is they'll take whoever they want as slaves, and then they kill everyone else. When I say everyone, I'm not being euphemistic. I'm not using symbolic language. I'm saying literally, everyone else is killed. All of them. And then the city is destroyed. Put to the torch. Destroyed. If any are left alive, and actually in a case like this nobody is, the only people who are left alive, aside from the slaves that are going back to serve the Mongols, are the guys strapped to these stakes. And they're probably insane by now, because they've just watched their home be destroyed and their loved ones be killed or enslaved in most horrible fashion. It does something to you. And then these madmen are released, given enough food, and they're sent in the direction the Mongols plan to conquer, so that they bear witness to the other cities that they encounter. So that sometimes the other cities hear about this, and the moment the Mongols show up, their small group, the gates are opened, they surrender, just to a bunch of guys who are scouts, in hopes that the Mongols might spare them. And they don't always. Every year when I teach World War II, my final part of the lesson, and I did this last Friday, is to play a video called The Fallen of World War II, which talks about just the people who died. And it's actually got fairly low death counts, but it's really, really well done. And one of the moments in it is they show a comparison of the number of deaths from horrible events in human history before World War II and after. And then they adjust those for global population. By far, the worst event in human history, in terms of war, in terms of killing a proportion of human beings, is the Mongol conquest. By far. Larger proportion of the population than World War II. Obviously, the Black Death takes more than that, but that's a disease. So, what comes out of Central Asia is an extinction event for the Khwarazm Shah and for his empire. Temujin has become the emperor of mankind, and his forces cross through the Great Wall, and they conquer China, which is no small feat. The last message that Genghis Khan has for his followers is, view the cities as sources of rapine and plunder. Go into them like predators after prey. But never settle there. If you settle there, the luxuries and soft and easy life will become your life. And you will lose what makes you men. Genghis Khan warned his men at his death after the conquest of China not to become Sinified, that is, to become China-sized, that is, to become civilized. To his horror, he would have learned that his grandson Kublai would rule from a pleasure palace called Xanadu and wear Chinese silks and have a Chinese harem and eat Chinese food. Kublai Khan was still tough, but he had already succumbed to the blandishments of the good life in China. This is how China handles barbarians, by the way. It worked until they encountered Europeans in the age of industry. The Chinese will get conquered again and again by barbarians, but the barbarians all go, wow, this Chinese lifestyle is pretty nice. Enough food, tasty food, silks, baths, health. Hey, let's be like this. And they eventually lose their edge and they get absorbed into China. It's the opposite of what happened in Rome. In Rome, we fight the barbarians, we're crushed by the barbarians. Barbarians were now owned by the barbarians. It's a different thing. It's like a strong oak tree meeting a storm. It either survives or it's destroyed, as opposed to a willow tree. The Chinese are like a willow tree. They blow all over the place, but they are probably going to survive. Anyway, we will leave things in the Mongol conquest. You may talk amongst yourselves until dismissal. We're going to watch other things tomorrow. I guess, though, I will conclude with another song by The Who because it's fun.